I didn't realize the truth until the apartment went quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that hums in your ears after someone leaves and takes their noise with them. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at a mug I hadn't thrown away yet. There was a faint crack near the handle. I'd noticed it months earlier and ignored it. That felt important later. Back then, it was just a mug, the breakup itself wasn't explosive. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just a long pause, a sentence that landed wrong, and the way their eyes didn't try to convince me anymore. It was only after, days later, maybe weeks, that the past started rearranging itself. Conversations. Silences. The things I thought were nothing, they didn't feel like nothing anymore. The quiet didn't hit all at once, it crept in through small things. The fridge hummed louder than I remembered. The hallway light flickered when it shouldn't. Every sound had space around it now, like it was echoing off something missing. I kept expecting footsteps behind me. The soft drag of socks on the floor. Nothing came. I sat on the edge of the couch because I hadn't moved the cushions yet. Their side still dipped inward, like it was holding a shape out of habit. I didn't straighten it. I don't know why. It felt wrong to erase it too fast. We'd broken up that morning. Or maybe late morning. Time was already doing that thing where it stops behaving. There was no fight. No slammed doors. Just a conversation that slowed down until it couldn't go forward anymore. I remember the way they kept rubbing their thumb along the seam of their sleeve. Over and over. I'd seen that gesture before. I just didn't know it meant goodbye then. They said they didn't know how to explain what they felt anymore. That sentence stuck. Not what they felt. What they didn't know how to explain. I nodded like I understood. Maybe I thought clarity would come later, like it always had. When the door closed, it wasn't dramatic. Just a soft click. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the deadbolt like it might say something new if I waited. The first thing I noticed after was the smell. Their shampoo still hung in the bathroom. Clean, sharp, a little citrus. I twisted the faucet on and off without washing my hands. The mirror fogged slightly, then cleared. My face looked the same. That bothered me more than it should have. I tried to distract myself. Picked up my phone. Put it back down. The screen stayed dark longer than usual. No messages. No, I forgot to say, nothing. By evening, I started cleaning. Not because I wanted things tidy. Because movement felt safer than stillness. I found a receipt folded into the couch seam. Old. Pointless. I smoothed it out anyway. That's when I noticed the mug in the sink. The one with the hairline crack by the handle. They'd always used that one. I turned it slowly in my hand, watching the water line catch in the fracture. I remember thinking I should throw it away. I didn't. That night, I slept on my side of the bed, leaving the rest untouched. The sheets were cool where no one lay. The ceiling fan clicked once every rotation. I counted them without meaning to. Lying there, I told myself this was just the shock. That tomorrow would explain today. That the past would stay where I left it. I didn't know yet that the quiet wasn't empty, it was waiting. When we first got together, nothing felt dramatic. That was the appeal. We didn't crash into each other. We settled. Conversations flowed without effort. There were no games, no guessing. We agreed on small things easily. Where to eat. When to leave. What show to half-watch while scrolling on our phones. It felt adult. Stable. I remember thinking how rare that felt. We built routines fast. Coffee in the morning, always 2 mugs even if one of us woke up late. Grocery runs on the same night every week. They liked to walk slightly ahead of me, not out of impatience, just habit. I matched their pace without thinking. Trust didn't feel like something I gave. It felt assumed. They answered messages openly. Left their phone face up on the table. Talked about their past without hesitation. I never felt the need to check anything. That version of me didn't live like that. We spent quiet evenings together without trying to fill them. They'd read. I'd pretend to. Sometimes our feet touched on the couch. Sometimes they didn't. It all felt normal. Safe. There was one night early on when they fell asleep with their head on my chest. Their breathing slowed. The TV kept playing to no one. I remember staring at the wall and thinking, this is it. This is what people mean. I told my friends things were easy. I said it like it was a compliment. Like effortlessness meant permanence. Looking back, I realize how much I relied on that feeling. How much I let it do the work for me. I assumed that because nothing hurt, nothing was wrong. That silence meant peace, not avoidance. Even when small differences showed up, I smoothed them over. We handled stress differently. I liked to talk things through right away. They needed time. Space. I told myself that was healthy. I admired it, even when they pulled inward, I waited. When they smiled again, I believed it meant resolution. I never asked what happened in between. There were moments, tiny ones, when I felt like I was standing on solid ground without looking down. I didn't question it. Why would I? The ground had never moved before. That's the version of the story I carried with me for a long time, the one where nothing was wrong because nothing ever exploded. I didn't understand yet how much damage can happen quietly. I need to be honest about who I was back then, not who I think I was. Who I actually was. I saw myself as steady. Reliable. The calm one. I prided myself on not being reactive, on giving space, on trusting without hovering. I thought that made me mature. Safer to love. When problems came up in other people's relationships, I listened with a quiet confidence. I didn't say it out loud, but I thought, we don't have that. We communicate. We respect each other. I worked a lot. Not in a dramatic, workaholic way. Just enough that evenings felt earned. I came home tired but present. Or at least I thought I was. I'd ask how their day went while loosening my shoes, half facing them, already shedding the outside world. They always answered. Sometimes briefly. Sometimes not at all. I filled in the gaps myself. Bad meeting. Long day. They'll tell me if it matters. I didn't see my silence as absence. I saw it as restraint. I gave them room and called it care. I didn't notice when that room started to stretch. There was a moment, I remember it clearly now, when they asked me if I ever worried about us. We were brushing our teeth. Foam in our mouths. I laughed a little, because it felt absurd. I shook my head and said no. They paused. Spit. Rinsed longer than necessary. I didn't ask why they asked. I thought confidence was reassuring. I thought certainty was kindness. I didn't realize how alone that might feel from the other side. I also didn't think of myself as someone who missed things. I noticed details. I remembered birthdays. I knew how they took their coffee. I remembered the names of people they mentioned once in passing. I used those things as proof that I was paying attention, but attention isn't the same as curiosity. I was looking without really asking. If something felt off, I trusted it would correct itself. I believed relationships had a natural gravity. That if you didn't fight it, things would fall back into place, so when small changes started happening, I adjusted without questioning why I was adjusting at all. At the time, that felt like flexibility. Now, it feels like avoidance. I didn't know yet how much I was relying on my version of the story to stay intact. The first signs weren't events, they were absences. They stopped leaving notes on the counter. Nothing dramatic. Just a missing habit. I noticed once, shrugged, and moved on. People grow out of routines. That's normal. Their phones started staying in their pocket more. Not hidden. Just. Not around. I told myself it was courtesy. Being present. I admired that, too. They began going to bed earlier than me. Or later. Our sleep stopped overlapping cleanly. I'd hear the shower run after midnight. Steam under the door. The bed cool when I slid in. Or I'd wake up alone and find them already dressed, quiet, moving through the room like they didn't want to disturb something fragile. We talked about logistics more than feelings. Who was buying groceries? When the bill was due. What day we'd see friends. The conversations were smooth, efficient. I mistook that for harmony. Once, I came home and found a small box on the table. Plain. No label. When I asked, they said it was something for work. They smiled when they said it. Not forced. Just brief. I accepted it without thinking. There were moments when they seemed distracted, eyes drifting away mid-sentence. I'd pause, wait for them to come back. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they apologized. Sometimes they didn't even notice they'd left. I didn't confront any of it because none of it felt confrontable. There was nothing to point to. No accusation that wouldn't sound ridiculous out loud. So I let the moments pass, unrecorded. I told myself I was being patient. Understanding. I told myself relationships weren't about keeping score, but memory keeps score whether you want it to or not. At the time, each detail felt too small to matter. A missing note. A cooler pillow. A smile that didn't linger. I trusted the larger picture more than the pixels. I see now that I was collecting fragments without assembling them. Letting them rattle around quietly while I focused on the version of us that still made sense. If I'm honest, part of me didn't want to look too closely. Looking might have meant seeing something I didn't know how to fix, and as long as nothing demanded fixing, I stayed comfortable in the not knowing. That comfort didn't last. The unease didn't announce itself, it hovered. There were days when the apartment felt crowded even though nothing had changed. They'd sit across from me, scrolling, leg bouncing slightly. I'd feel like I was interrupting something just by speaking. I started choosing my words more carefully. Not because they asked me to. Because I sensed weight in the air. Like certain topics landed heavier than they used to. I couldn't have told you which ones. Once, I reached for their hand while we were watching something. My fingers brushed theirs. They didn't pull away. They just didn't respond. Their hand stayed still, warm but unengaged. After a few seconds, I let go and pretended I'd only been adjusting the blanket. They didn't notice. Or maybe they did and chose not to. I asked if they were okay more often. Not directly. Casually. Long day. You seem tired. They always had an answer ready. Work. Family. Just one of those weeks. The answers were reasonable. I accepted them because they fit, but something about the way they said them felt rehearsed. Not deceptive. Just contained. The first time I felt real friction was during a conversation that went nowhere. We were talking about plans months ahead. Nothing serious. Just hypothetical. They went quiet mid-discussion. Stared at the table. When I asked what was wrong, they said they didn't know if they should be planning that far anymore. I laughed softly. Tried to lighten it. Said we didn't have to decide anything now. They nodded. But they didn't smile. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. I watched the shadow of the ceiling fan sweep the walls. I thought about that pause. How it had come out of nowhere. How it felt like a door closing gently instead of slamming. I considered asking more questions. Then I imagined the conversation stretching late, turning heavy. I told myself it was better to wait. To give them space to come to me when they were ready. That was my pattern. Wait. Assume good intentions. Let things breathe. I didn't realize breathing room can also become distance. From that point on, I felt like I was slightly behind the conversation at all times. Like they'd already processed something I hadn't been invited into yet. I told myself it would surface eventually. I just didn't know how much was already happening without me. When uncertainty stretches on long enough, your mind fills it. Mine built a story that felt reasonable. I decided they were overwhelmed. Burned out. Caught in something personal they didn't have words for yet. I told myself this wasn't about us. That thinking it was would be selfish. That story made me kinder. Quieter. I stopped bringing up anything that felt emotionally charged. I handled more things on my own. Chores. Decisions. Silence. I framed it as support. As being the kind of partner who doesn't add pressure. I remember feeling almost proud of how little I needed in return. if they forgot to text, I told myself they were busy. If they canceled plans, I said it was smart of them to rest. I even rehearsed explanations for their behavior in my head, just in case anyone asked. I noticed I was doing this, and instead of questioning it, I doubled down. I didn't want to be the problem. I didn't want to create one by asking the wrong thing at the wrong time. There was a night when they came home late and went straight to the shower without a word. The bathroom door closed softly. I heard the water start. I sat at the table, staring at my phone, heart beating faster than it needed to. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself not everything needed an explanation. When they came out, hair damp, eyes tired, they kissed my cheek and apologized for the late hour. I said it was fine before they even finished the sentence. I meant it. Or I wanted to. The wrong story I told myself didn't feel like denial. It felt like generosity. Like choosing trust over fear, but there's a difference between trust and silence. I was blurring it on purpose. The strange thing is, once I committed to that version of events, everything started to make sense again. The distance. The fatigue. The way they sometimes looked relieved when I didn't ask follow-up questions. I thought I was helping us survive a rough patch. I didn't realize I was helping something else stay hidden. That belief carried me for a while, right up until it almost explained everything. The explanation came to me sideways, not from them. From a moment that felt accidental. We were cleaning out a drawer together. One of those half-hearted resets you do when things feel cluttered emotionally but you pretend it's about space. Papers, cables, old mail. My hands moved on autopilot. That's when I found a folded pamphlet. Thick paper. Muted colors. No branding. Just words about stress, identity, and change. The kind of language that feels careful. Deliberate. I didn't say anything right away. I watched their face instead. Their shoulders stiffened just a little. Not panic. Recognition. They exhaled and said they'd been thinking about making some changes. About themselves. About how they'd been feeling disconnected from who they were. They said they didn't want to worry me before they understood it themselves. It clicked into place so smoothly it scared me, all the distance. The quiet. The hesitation about the future. The way they'd seemed somewhere else even when they were right in front of me. Of course. They were struggling internally. This wasn't about me. It never had been. I felt relief wash through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. I told them I was there. That they didn't have to carry it alone. That we'd figure things out together, at whatever pace they needed. They smiled then. A real one. Softer. Grateful, for the first time in weeks. I felt useful again. We talked late that night. Not in detail. Just enough. They said they'd been afraid of saying the wrong thing. Of making choices before they were ready. I told them I understood. I meant it. That explanation wrapped everything in context. It turned confusion into compassion. I stopped second-guessing myself. I stopped watching so closely. There were still gaps, but now they felt justified. Necessary. Healing takes time. Privacy matters. I repeated those ideas like mantras. For a while, things even improved. They laughed more. Touched me more. The apartment felt warmer. Less tense. That's the thing about almost answers. They don't just explain the past. They promise a future. And I wanted to believe in that future badly enough to stop asking what the explanation didn't cover. I didn't notice the questions I was leaving behind. Once I had something to hold on to, I built around it. I adjusted my expectations. I stopped asking about timelines. I framed everything as temporary. If they pulled away, it was part of the process. If they needed space, it was healthy. I became fluent in patience. Friends asked if everything was okay. I said yes without hesitation. I even defended them when no one was criticizing. I explained their distance like it was a medical fact. Like I was protecting something fragile. At home, things settled into a new rhythm. Quieter, but intentional. We checked in more gently. Conversations stayed surface level by mutual unspoken agreement. It felt respectful. Mature, still, there were moments that didn't fit. They guarded their schedule more closely now. Not secretively. Just firmly. Plans were penciled in, not shared. When I asked about certain days, they'd pause before answering, like they were choosing between options I couldn't see. Their phone buzzed more often. Not constantly. Just enough to register. They'd glance at it, then set it face down. I told myself it was work. Or friends. Or part of whatever they were navigating internally. I noticed how quickly they changed topics when I asked about how they were really feeling. They'd redirect with practiced ease. Humor. Deflection. A kiss on the forehead. Sometimes, late at night, I'd replay conversations in my head and feel a quiet tug of doubt. It never lasted long. I reminded myself how far we'd come. How brave they were being. How selfish it would be to make this about my discomfort. The explanation I'd accepted didn't just clarify their behavior, it redefined my role. I was the supporter now. The steady one. The person who waited. That identity felt solid. Necessary. I clung to it, so when they suggested we take a short break, not a breakup, just space, I didn't panic. They said it would help them think more clearly. Reset. I helped them pack a small bag. I told them to take their time. I meant it. As the door closed behind them that night, I told myself this was part of healing. That distance could bring clarity. I didn't know yet that clarity was coming for me too, just not in the way I expected. The apartment felt different with them gone, not emptier. Sharper, their absence outlined everything they used to fill. The quiet wasn't gentle anymore. It pressed. I started noticing things I'd tuned out before. How the floor creaked in the same spot every morning. How the mail slot snapped back too loudly. How often I checked my phone without realizing it. At first, I stayed loyal to the explanation. I told myself this space was temporary. Productive. I resisted the urge to count days. I didn't want to rush them, but distance does strange things to memory. Without the constant task of being understanding, my mind started wandering backward. Scenes replayed themselves, slower this time. Conversations I'd skimmed over. Pauses I'd rushed to fill. I remembered the night they asked if I ever worried about us. The way I'd laughed. The way their face had closed off just slightly after. That detail resurfaced with new weight. I remembered how often they'd been too tired to talk, but somehow alert enough to scroll for hours afterward. How they'd started taking calls on the balcony. Stepping outside even when the apartment was quiet. None of it meant anything on its own. That's what I told myself. But the distance made it harder to ignore how often those moments had clustered together. They checked in every few days. Short messages. Thoughtful, but contained. Always ending with reassurance. Still figuring things out. I appreciate your patience. This space is helping. I believed them. Mostly, but I also noticed what they didn't ask. They didn't ask how I was doing. Not really. Not beyond polite phrasing. It felt like I was frozen in place, while they were actively moving somewhere else. One afternoon, I cleaned the apartment again. This time, not to distract myself. To inventory. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in months. Found things that didn't belong to me. Things I couldn't place. The spare key. Not labeled. Not hidden. Just there. I held it in my palm longer than necessary. Felt its weight. Tried to remember when we'd made copies. I couldn't. That was the first time the explanation cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. I set the key back where I found it, but I didn't forget it. Once the crack was there, everything leaked through it. I started replaying moments I defended without question. The late nights. The sudden errands. The way certain names came up casually and then disappeared from conversation entirely. Not avoided. Just erased. I noticed how often they'd been elsewhere without being gone. Physically present, mentally absent. How I'd filled that gap with empathy instead of curiosity. The spare key stayed on my mind. Not because it proved anything, but because it didn't need to exist. There was no story attached to it. No explanation waiting. It was just a fact. Sitting quietly, I checked the calendar on the fridge. Old plans still written in faded ink. Dinners that had been cancelled last minute. Weekends that had shifted without reason. I remembered how easily I'd accepted every change. One night, I scrolled through our old messages. Not looking for betrayal. Looking for tone. For timing. For patterns I hadn't noticed while living inside them. There were gaps. Long ones. Periods where I'd sent paragraphs and received short replies hours later. I'd told myself they were overwhelmed. That typing felt like too much. Now I noticed how often those gaps lined up with the times they'd been out clearing their head. I hated myself for doing this. For dissecting something that was supposed to be healing. For feeling suspicious when I'd promised patience. It felt like a violation. Like I was betraying the role I'd accepted, but the truth didn't arrive as an accusation, it arrived as alignment. Too many small things pointed in the same direction. Not to a single act. To a pattern of emotional absence that had nothing to do with self-discovery and everything to do with redirection. They weren't lost, they were transitioning. That realization didn't explode. It settled. Heavy. Quiet. Like dust after something collapses off-screen. When they finally asked to talk in person, I already knew something had shifted. Not because I had proof. Because my body wasn't surprised anymore, I agreed to meet them. Neutral place. Daylight. Public enough to stay civil. As I waited, I watched people pass by, unaware of how cleanly my past was rearranging itself. I still didn't know the full truth, but I knew the explanation I'd protected was no longer enough, and whatever was coming next was going to hurt more because I'd helped make space for it. They were already seated when I arrived, hands folded. Posture careful. Like they were bracing against something invisible, we exchanged small talk that didn't land. Comments about the weather. The place. Neutral ground. I noticed they didn't meet my eyes right away. When they did, it was brief. Like checking a mirror you don't want to look into too long, they thanked me for meeting them. For being patient. That word again. It sounded different now. Less like appreciation. More like closure. They started with the explanation I already knew. The confusion. The need for space. The pressure they felt trying to be present when they weren't sure who they were becoming. I nodded. Let them speak. I'd heard this version before. Then they paused, their fingers tightened around the cup in front of them. Knuckles pale. A breath in. Out, they said there was something they hadn't known how to bring up. Something that hadn't felt real enough at first to justify the damage it would cause. Something that started small. Harmless, even. They'd met someone. Not recently. Not suddenly. Not physically, at first. Just conversations. Shared frustrations. The kind of understanding that feels rare when you're already drifting. They told themselves it was nothing. That it didn't mean anything because it hadn't crossed a line. I felt my chest go hollow. Not sharp pain. Absence. Like the air had been pulled out cleanly. They said it helped them realize things about themselves. About what they'd been missing. About how long they'd been disconnected, even before it started. They said they never meant to hurt me. That they'd tried to pull back. To do the right thing. I believed them. That was the worst part, because suddenly, everything fit. The guarded phone. The late nights. The spare key. The way they'd already been emotionally somewhere else while I was learning how to wait better. They said they ended things with the other person when they realized they couldn't keep pretending. That they needed to face the truth, even if it came too late. I asked one question. Just one. Did you ever plan to tell me if I hadn't agreed to the break? They looked down. Long enough to answer without speaking. That silence hurt more than the words. I realized then that the truth hadn't been hidden from me because it was complicated. It had been hidden because I made it easy to hide. I paid for our drinks. Stood up. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. As I walked away, I understood something with painful clarity. The truth didn't make sense before because I wasn't ready to see it. I was too busy being the safe place they needed while they left, and now I had to decide what to do with that understanding. The days after that conversation blurred together, not because I was overwhelmed. Because nothing demanded my attention anymore, no messages to interpret. No pauses to decode. No role to perform. The quiet returned, but it felt different this time. Less like waiting. More like aftermath. I replayed the relationship from the beginning, but the tone had changed. Moments I'd cherished now carried a second meaning. Not fake. Just incomplete. Like I'd been watching a play with half the dialogue muted, I thought about how many chances there had been to ask harder questions. How often I'd chosen calm over clarity. How proud I'd been of my patience. I don't think they set out to betray me. I really don't. I think they drifted, and I made the drifting comfortable. I created a space where honesty felt optional because discomfort was something I absorbed quietly. That realization didn't make me angry, it made me complicit. I threw away the cracked mug eventually. It shattered in the trash bag when I dropped it. The sound startled me more than it should have. I stood there for a moment, listening to the echo fade. Friends asked whose fault it was. I didn't have an answer they liked. There was no villain that fit cleanly. Just two people who avoided different things and called it love. Some nights, I still wonder if I pushed them away by being too certain. If my confidence left no room for their doubts to breathe. Other nights, I wonder if I ignored my own instincts because I didn't want to risk being wrong. The truth only made sense after the breakup because that's when I stopped protecting it from myself. I don't know what lesson I'm supposed to take from this. Whether I should be more confrontational next time, or less accommodating. Whether trust should be earned continuously, or assumed until proven otherwise. All I know is this: silence can look like stability if you're not listening closely, patience can feel like love when it's really fear of disruption, so I keep asking myself the question that still doesn't have an easy answer: was I wrong to trust the version of the story that felt kindest, or wrong to ignore the one that felt true? I'm still sitting with that.